My hands were still shaking when I opened the dishwasher. 2 wine glasses sat on the top rack, angled like someone had placed them carefully, like proof meant to be hidden in plain sight. I don't drink much, and my boyfriend barely touches alcohol when he's in study mode. That's what he called it. His sacred, relentless routine of labs, flashcards, practice exams, and late night, just one more chapter promises. So 2 glasses didn't feel casual. They felt intentional. I stood there in the soft hum of the kitchen, the air smelling faintly like lemon soap and something sweeter underneath, like a perfume that didn't belong to either of us. My chest tightened in that way it does when your body understands the truth before your mind is willing to say it out loud. 3 days earlier, I'd been out of town with my father, meeting suppliers for the family business. I'd called my boyfriend twice on the second night. No answer. He finally called back around midnight, breathless, apologizing. He told me he'd been at a study group at the university library, phone on silent. He even listed names, confident, casual, like he'd rehearsed it. I believed him because I wanted to, because I'd already been the villain once. Months ago, I'd questioned his insane study schedule. I'd compared him to my brother, to my friends, to people who seemed to have time to live while still earning degrees. I'd said things I can't take back, things that landed like insults disguised as concern. He'd cried that night, not loudly, just silently, wiping his face with the heel of his hand as if tears were another task he didn't have time for. I apologized. I tried to become the kind of girlfriend who supports instead of doubts. I learned how to clean a bathroom properly. I even hired a cleaning service when we both burned out. So why did I feel like I was back at the beginning again, standing in my own kitchen, staring at 2 wine glasses like they were staring back? I reached for my phone with numb fingers and typed a message to his classmate. "Hey, how did the study group go the other night?" The reply came fast. "What study group?" My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I missed a step. I heard the front door click open behind me, and I realized, whatever happened while I was gone, my boyfriend hadn't just been busy. He'd been lying. I'm Alyssa, and I'm 21. People hear that and assume my life is simple, young, comfortable, protected. They see the apartment, the nice car, the way my last name opens doors, and they think I've never had to fight for anything. The truth is, I've fought in quieter ways, not for money, for being understood, for being seen as more than the business heir's girlfriend, more than a girl living on easy mode. My family is well off. My father runs a successful company that's been passed down through 2 generations. When I finished high school, I didn't go to college. Dad had already started training me in the business. I threw myself into it because I wanted to prove I wasn't just lucky. I wanted to earn my place, not inherit it. That's where my boyfriend came into my life. His name is Mia in the original story, but in my life, because I'm telling this from a woman's perspective, he became Mason. Mason, 20, the kind of person who looked like he carried his future on his back. We met in our last year of middle school, started dating when we were both 17. Back then, he was all sharp edges and determination, obsessive about grades, always afraid one mistake would ruin everything. He came from a working-class family. His mom was a physical therapist at the local hospital, and Mason grew up watching her come home exhausted but proud. He used to talk about her like she was proof that hard work could change a whole family's trajectory. "I'm going to be like her," he told me once, eyes bright in the dim light of his bedroom desk lamp. "But I want to go further. I want to build something." That ambition was magnetic. A year ago, Mason got accepted into a competitive pre-physical therapy program at a well-regarded university in our city. He cried when the acceptance email came. Not big, dramatic sobs. Just tears he tried to hide by rubbing his face like he was irritated. I remember smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. Around the same time, I'd gotten a promotion at work and bought my first apartment. It felt natural, almost inevitable, that we'd move in together. His campus was a short bus ride away. My place was close enough that his life could be easier. When we talked about expenses, I offered to cover everything: rent, bills, groceries. Not because I wanted power, because I had the ability, and he had the kind of dream that doesn't survive if you're exhausted from juggling too many jobs. Mason pushed back at first. "That's not fair," he said. "I don't want to be kept." The word hit me weird, like he was afraid I'd see him as dependent, like he was afraid my money would turn him into something small. So we compromised. He wouldn't take a part-time job during the heavy semesters. Instead, he'd handle cooking and cleaning, his contribution. It sounded fair at the time. I'd come home from the office smelling like printer ink and stress, and there would be food on the table, a real meal, something warm. We'd sit on the couch and talk about his classes, my day, the future. For the first few months, it worked. Then the program got harder. Mason started waking up at 6, leaving for lectures and labs, coming home and immediately burying himself in textbooks until midnight. Weekends turned into study marathons. The apartment slowly changed from our home into his battlefield. Flashcards everywhere, anatomy diagrams taped to the wall, highlighters bleeding neon across pages. And as his workload grew, everything else slipped. Dishes piled up, laundry stayed unfolded, takeout boxes stacked in the trash because I'll cook tomorrow, I swear. I told myself I could handle a messy apartment. But what I couldn't handle was feeling like I was living next to someone who was always elsewhere, always chasing something I couldn't see. That's when the doubts started. Not because I thought he was lazy, because I thought maybe he was hiding something. And the worst part? I hated myself for even thinking it. The doubts didn't arrive all at once. They crept in quietly, wearing the disguise of reason. At first, I blamed myself. I told myself I was being impatient, entitled, another privileged woman who didn't understand what it meant to fight for a future. Mason wasn't out partying. He wasn't wasting time. He was working. That's what people like him do when everything matters. But as weeks passed, the imbalance in our life became impossible to ignore. I'd come home from work, heels kicked off at the door, laptop bag slung over a chair, and the apartment would be exactly as I'd left it that morning. Sink full, trash untouched, a cold plate in the microwave with a sticky note. Studying late. Sorry. Love you. I started eating alone more often, scrolling my phone on the couch while Mason sat 5 feet away at his desk, headphones on, mouthing terms like origin, insertion, nerve pathway, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Sometimes I'd watch him and feel proud. Other times, invisible. I never went to college. That fact hovered between us like an unspoken insecurity. I learned business from boardrooms and contracts, not classrooms and labs. I didn't know what a normal workload looked like for a pre-PT student. All I had were comparisons. My older brother, Thomas, had done pre-med before deciding the family business was easier and more profitable. I didn't remember him studying like this. My friends in engineering and computer science still found time for weekends, hobbies, laughter. Mason looked like he was running a marathon that never ended. One night, after too many hours staring at spreadsheets, I met up with Jake, a mutual friend, for drinks. He was studying business administration at the same university as Mason. Same campus, same buildings, same coffee shops. I mentioned how exhausted Mason always seemed. Jake laughed, not cruelly, casually. "It's just physical therapy," he said, swirling his beer. "Not medical school. I don't get why he studies like his life depends on it." I snapped back immediately. Told him he didn't understand Mason's program. Told him he was being dismissive. Jake shrugged. "I'm just saying, everyone I know in healthcare still sleeps." I went home angry, defensive, and unsettled. That night, the apartment was chaos. Laundry on the floor. Dishes stacked like a quiet accusation. Mason was hunched over his desk, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot from staring at a screen too long. Something inside me snapped, not explosively, but sharply. "Do you really need to study this much?" I asked. He looked up like I'd spoken a foreign language. I tried to explain awkwardly that I was worried, that the apartment was falling apart, that we never spent time together, that maybe he wasn't managing his time well. The moment I mentioned Jake's comment, Mason stood up. His face flushed, his hands shook. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "None of you do." He launched into explanations, acceptance rates, GPA cutoffs, professors who destroyed students with a single exam. He said his entire future depended on being perfect. When I brought up our arrangement, the one where he'd handle the apartment, he broke. Not in anger, in tears. "I'm doing my best," he whispered. "I'm exhausted. I feel like I'm drowning, and now you're telling me I'm failing you too." I felt like I'd kicked something fragile. We apologized that night, promised to do better, promised to understand each other. But the damage was already there, because after that fight, I started watching him, watching the clock when he said he was studying, watching his screen reflections, watching the way he angled his laptop away from me, not suspiciously, but enough that my mind filled in the gaps. I hated myself for it, and yet I couldn't stop. Then came the emails, late-night timestamps, one name appearing over and over again. Jake. And suddenly my fear wasn't about textbooks anymore. It was about trust. The night everything cracked open wasn't dramatic at first. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet mistake that turned into a truth I couldn't put back where it belonged. Mason was in the shower, steam curled out from under the bathroom door, fogging the hallway mirror. He'd asked me to order food from our usual Thai place. Same order, extra chili on his, no peanuts on mine. I grabbed his laptop from the desk because my phone was dead and figured it would be faster. I wasn't snooping. I need to be clear about that, because intention matters. I wasn't searching for proof. I wasn't hunting for betrayal. I clicked the browser to type in the delivery site. An email tab was already open. I was about to close it when one name caught my eye. Jake. The subject line read, "Stats problem set, thanks again." My fingers froze on the trackpad. I told myself not to scroll. I told myself this was none of my business. But curiosity has a way of disguising itself as self-protection. The email was harmless on the surface. Academic, polite, attachments, practice problems, lecture notes. But the timestamp glared at me like an accusation. 1:02 a.m. I scrolled up. More emails. Same tone, same subject matter. Same hours. Late nights, early mornings. Conversations happening while Mason told me he was buried in solo study. I closed the laptop and sat there, heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it over the running shower. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself collaboration was normal, that I was projecting old insecurities, that trust means choosing belief over paranoia. A week later, I had to travel out of town with my father. 3 days of meetings, contracts, polite smiles. Before I left, Mason kissed me goodbye and joked about how much studying he'd get done without distractions. The comment stung, but I swallowed it. On the second night, I called him. No answer. I tried again an hour later. Still nothing. By midnight, my chest felt tight in that familiar way, like waiting for a shoe to drop. When he finally called back, his voice was breathless, rushed. "Sorry," he said. "Study group, library, phone was on silent." "Who was there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He listed names, familiar ones. Not Jake. I nodded to myself, even though he couldn't see it. When I came home the next day, the apartment was spotless. Not Mason cleaned in a panic clean. Immaculate. Counters wiped, floors vacuumed. The kind of clean that takes time he supposedly didn't have. Then I opened the dishwasher. 2 wine glasses. I stared at them for a long time. That's when I texted Sophia, Mason's classmate, the one he always talked about when he needed to vent about labs or professors. "Hey, how did the study group go the other night?" Her reply came fast. "What study group?" My vision blurred. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone shaking in my hand, replaying everything in my head. The emails, the late calls, the glasses, the lie. When Mason came home, I didn't raise my voice. That almost scared him more. I told him what I'd seen. The emails, the wine glasses, Sophia's message. I asked him one question. "Have you been honest with me?" His face shifted through emotions so fast it was dizzying. Surprise, guilt, then defensiveness snapping into place like armor. He admitted Jake had come over, that they'd studied, that they'd shared a bottle of wine. "It wasn't romantic," he said quickly. "I swear. He was struggling with statistics. I was helping him." "Then why lie?" I asked. He looked away. "I didn't want to fight," he said. "I knew how you felt about Jake. I didn't want you to overthink." The words landed like a slap. We argued for hours. About honesty, about boundaries, about trust that felt paper thin now. He said my past doubts made him feel interrogated. I said his lie made me feel foolish. By the end of the night, we were both exhausted, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the space between us heavy with everything unsaid. Mason packed a bag and said he'd stay with Sophia for the weekend. "Just to cool off," he said. I watched the door close behind him. And for the first time since we moved in together, I wondered, not if I trusted him, but if trust could survive once it had been cracked. The apartment felt too quiet without him. Not peaceful, hollow. I kept catching myself listening for the sounds I'd grown used to. The scrape of his chair against the floor, the soft tapping of keys, the muttered curse when he couldn't remember a term. Each absence echoed louder than noise ever had. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I cleaned. I wiped counters that were already clean, folded laundry that didn't need folding, rearranged books on shelves just to feel like I was putting something back in order. But nothing inside me felt ordered. I replayed the argument over and over, searching for the moment I'd gone too far, or the moment I should have stopped believing so easily. Was I wrong to question him? Maybe. But lying wasn't nothing. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a difference in perspective. It was a choice. And yet, I couldn't ignore my own role in how we got here. I doubted him months ago, doubted his work ethic, his honesty, his priorities. I'd let my ignorance about higher education and my own insecurities do the talking. Even after I apologized, even after I tried to be better, that doubt must have lingered between us like a ghost. Maybe he lied because he was tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of defending. Tired of feeling like he had to justify every hour of his day. That thought hurt more than the idea of Jake, because it meant I'd helped create the space where dishonesty felt safer than truth. Still, that didn't erase the knot in my chest. I thought about the emails again. Not the content, but the timing. About the wine. About how easily he'd slipped into a lie that sounded practiced. I sat on the couch that night and stared at the blank wall across from me, asking myself questions I didn't want to answer. If nothing inappropriate happened, why didn't he tell me? If I'd been the one doing this, would he have been okay with it? How many other small lies had I never noticed? The next morning, I woke up to a message from him. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have lied. I just needed space. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, we need to talk, calmly, when you're ready. The weekend dragged. I met my father for coffee and nodded through conversations about suppliers and profit margins without hearing a word. I went for a run and pushed myself until my lungs burned, trying to outrun the thoughts chasing me. By Sunday night, Mason came back. He looked smaller somehow, tired. His shoulders slumped like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. We sat at the table, not the couch this time. That felt important, more deliberate. He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. I don't want you guessing anymore, he said quietly. He showed me everything, every email, every message, study schedules, attachments. Nothing flirtatious. Nothing hidden. Just work. Then he apologized again, this time without defending himself. I was wrong, he said, no matter the reason. I told him I was sorry, too, for letting my fears turn into suspicion, for not trusting the person who had never actually given me reason not to. We didn't magically fix everything that night, but we set boundaries, clear ones. Jake wouldn't come over when I wasn't home. Study sessions would happen in public spaces. And most importantly, no more lies, even small ones meant to protect me. Trust, we agreed, wasn't about avoiding conflict. It was about choosing honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. When we went to bed that night, he reached for my hand like he wasn't sure I'd let him. I did, but I also knew something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about Jake. It was about power, privilege, and the invisible ways my comfort had blinded me to his pressure. And unless we faced that honestly, this wouldn't be the last crack. The agreement helped, at least on the surface. For a few weeks, things felt managed, controlled, like we'd patched a crack instead of fixing a foundation, but convinced ourselves it would hold if we didn't press on it too hard. Mason kept his word. Jake didn't come over again. Study sessions happened at the library or campus cafes. Mason told me who he was meeting, where he was going, how long he expected to be gone. He wasn't defensive about it. If anything, he was careful in a way that made my chest ache. Because caution isn't the same as trust. I tried to change too. I stopped asking questions that sounded like audits. I stopped checking the clock when he said he'd be home soon. I reminded myself daily that support doesn't mean supervision. But something inside me had already shifted. Not suspicion, awareness. I started noticing how often Mason apologized for things that weren't his fault. Sorry I forgot to text. Sorry the place is messy. Sorry I'm so tired. He said it the way people do when they've learned that taking up space comes with consequences. The imbalance between us, money, security, options, had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see how heavy it felt from his side. Then the pressure increased. Final season hit like a storm. Mason's days blurred into nights. Clinical prep, lab exams, cumulative tests that determined whether his GPA stayed above the cut line. He stopped sleeping more than 4 hours at a time. His hands shook when he drank coffee. His jaw stayed clenched, even when he laughed. I offered to do more around the apartment, to take things off his plate. He said yes, but quietly, like it cost him something to accept. I could see it in the way he hesitated before agreeing, like he was afraid I'd resent him later. And maybe that fear wasn't unfounded, because part of me did feel resentful sometimes, not at him, but at the situation. I worked long hours too. I carried responsibility, but no one ever questioned whether I deserved my future. No exam could take it away from me. That difference sat between us at night, unspoken. Then my father dropped a bomb. We were having lunch in his office when he mentioned a new opportunity, expansion, bigger contracts, a potential leadership role that would put me even closer to the center of the company. I should have been thrilled. Instead, my first thought was Mason. Late nights turned into heavier conversations. What happens when your program gets even harder? I asked one night, trying to keep my voice neutral. He shrugged. I pushed through. And if it keeps taking everything out of you? He didn't answer right away. I don't get another option, he said finally. That sentence echoed in my head for days. Then came another shift, subtle but unmistakable. Mason started pulling inward. Not emotionally distant, but guarded, like he was protecting something fragile inside himself. He stopped venting about school, stopped asking for help unless I offered first. He smiled more carefully. One evening, I found him sitting on the floor by the bed, head in his hands. I'm fine, he said immediately, before I could ask. But he wasn't. He admitted he was terrified, not of failing, but of succeeding, and still feeling like he owed the world something for letting him in. I don't want to be a burden, he said quietly, on you, on anyone. The words cut deeper than any argument we'd had, because I realized then this wasn't about Jake, or emails, or wine glasses. This was about Mason living in a constant state of proving his worth. And me, without meaning to, standing on the other side of that pressure. Things escalated not with shouting, but with exhaustion. We snapped at each other over small things. Forgot to say goodnight, missed moments, passed like coworkers sharing space instead of partners building a life. One night, after he fell asleep at his desk, I covered him with a blanket and sat there watching his chest rise and fall. I felt something close to fear, not of losing him to someone else, but of losing us to a version of love that turns into quiet survival instead of partnership. I wondered, terrified, if loving him meant letting go of the control I didn't even know I was holding, and whether he'd ever stop feeling like he had to earn his place beside me. That question followed me into sleep, and it would lead us somewhere darker before we found our way out. The lowest point didn't come with a fight. It came with silence, the kind that settles into a room and makes everything feel heavier than it should, like even breathing requires permission. Mason stopped sleeping in the bed. At first, he said it was because he didn't want to wake me when he came in late from studying. Then it became habit. A blanket on the couch, his laptop always nearby. A life folded smaller to fit the space he thought he deserved. I told myself it was temporary, but nights stretched into weeks. I'd wake up alone, reach for him half asleep, and feel nothing but cold sheets. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, wondering how two people could live together and still feel this far apart. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Mason failed a physiology exam, not catastrophically, but enough to drop his GPA just below the threshold he needed to stay competitive. He didn't tell me right away. I found out because I overheard him on the phone with his mother, his voice shaking as he promised he'd fix it and do better. When he hung up, he just stood there in the kitchen, staring at nothing. I'm sorry, he said before I could speak. For what? I asked. For disappointing everyone. That's when it hit me, harder than any accusation ever could. He wasn't afraid of failing school. He was afraid of becoming disposable. I tried to reassure him. Told him one exam didn't define him. Told him I was proud of him. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, he didn't come to bed at all. I found him at dawn, sitting at the desk, surrounded by open textbooks, eyes red, hands trembling from too much caffeine and not enough rest. You can't do this, I said softly. You're hurting yourself. He finally looked at me then, really looked. I don't know how to stop, he said. If I slow down, everything falls apart. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. Love wasn't the thing crushing him. Fear was. Fear of losing his future. Fear of being seen as weak. Fear of being the one who didn't make it. And fear of needing me too much. I realized I couldn't fix that for him. No amount of money, reassurance, or patience could remove a pressure that had shaped him long before I came into his life. That night, I cried quietly in the bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub so he wouldn't hear me. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I didn't know how to stay without breaking both of us. The next morning, I made a decision, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I told him we needed help, real help, counseling, a pause, something to interrupt the spiral. He nodded, but he didn't look relieved. He looked scared. And that's when I knew we were standing at the edge of something irreversible. Either we'd learn how to be partners instead of lifelines, or we'd lose each other trying to survive. The turning point didn't arrive like a revelation. It came slowly, through exhaustion, honesty, and a conversation that stripped us both bare. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. No phones, no laptops, just 2 cups of coffee going cold between us. Mason spoke first. I don't know who I am if I'm not succeeding, he said quietly, and that scares me. I didn't interrupt. He told me things he'd never said out loud, about growing up watching his mother come home broken but proud, about learning early that rest was a luxury and failure was unforgivable, about feeling like every opportunity could disappear if he slipped even once. Then he said the thing that changed everything. I feel like I owe you, he admitted, and that makes me feel small. My chest tightened, not in defense, but in recognition. I'd never meant to make him feel indebted, but intention doesn't erase impact. I told him my side too, about guilt I'd never named, about how part of me did view our arrangement like a balance sheet, how when things felt unequal, my fear didn't come out as vulnerability, it came out as control. I said the word out loud for the first time. Control. The room went very still. We sat there for a long time, letting that truth breathe. Then we did something different. We stopped talking about chores, money, schedules, and talked about power, about how privilege can silence people without raising its voice, about how love can accidentally turn into leverage if you're not careful, about how trust doesn't survive when one person feels like they're constantly being evaluated. That conversation didn't fix everything, but it cracked something open in the right direction. The next week, Mason met with an academic advisor, not to beg, not to panic, to plan. He adjusted his course load, gave himself permission to be strategic instead of perfect. I did my part too. I stopped framing support as sacrifice. I stopped keeping mental tallies. I learned how to ask, what do you need, instead of deciding for him. We went to counseling, not because we were broken, but because we didn't want to be. And slowly, the air between us changed. Mason started sleeping in the bed again. Not every night, not perfectly, but enough. I watched him breathe easier, laugh more freely, study with focus instead of desperation. I learned how to step back without stepping away. The turning point wasn't about proving innocence or assigning blame. It was about choosing partnership over fear. And for the first time since those wine glasses appeared in the dishwasher, I felt something return. Hope. The fallout didn't explode. It unraveled, quietly, inevitably, like a knot that had been pulled too tight for too long, finally loosening, thread by thread. Mason finished the semester stronger than he'd expected. Not perfect, but solid. Straight A's didn't happen. But what did was something far more important: stability. His GPA climbed back above the cutoff. His advisor told him, calmly, without drama, that his application to the physical therapy program was very competitive. I watched the tension drain from his shoulders the day he told me. Not all at once, but enough that I realized how long he'd been living braced for impact. The ripple effects of our shift touched everything. The apartment changed, not just in cleanliness, but in feeling. It stopped being a place of pressure and became a place of rest. We hired a cleaning service twice a month without guilt or justification. I took over laundry completely. Mason cooked when he wanted to, not because he felt obligated. No more scorekeeping. No more silent contracts. Jake faded into the background, not because of a confrontation, but because relevance does that on its own when boundaries are clear. Mason still helped him occasionally with coursework, but always in public spaces, always transparent. And eventually, even that slowed. Jake apologized one afternoon for the comment that started everything. I didn't get it, he admitted. I was wrong. Mason accepted it without drama. That was another change. He no longer needed validation from people who didn't carry his weight. Then came the email. The acceptance letter. Mason read it 3 times before he spoke. Then he cried, openly this time, no wiping tears away like they were embarrassing. I held him while years of pressure poured out of his body like he'd been holding his breath his entire life. When he called his mother, her sobs filled the room through the speaker. Pride, relief, gratitude. Not once did she mention sacrifice. Just joy. The power dynamics that once haunted our relationship lost their grip, because truth does that. It strips illusions down to size. A few months later, my father offered me a promotion, a big one. Leadership in a new branch office in another state. Old me would have said yes immediately. New me paused. We talked about it for weeks, not as a problem to solve, but as a future to build. Mason researched transfer options, talked to program coordinators, mapped out consequences honestly. It would delay his graduation by a semester. And he still said yes, because this time, the decision wasn't about debt or fear. It was about choice. We decided together. That's what made the difference. The fallout didn't punish anyone. It clarified everything. The lies didn't survive transparency. The insecurities didn't survive naming. The imbalance didn't survive awareness. And what remained, after all the dust settled, was something sturdier than the relationship we'd started with. Not because it was easier, but because it was honest. I didn't win. Mason didn't lose. We both grew. And the silence that once felt suffocating, it turned into peace. 6 months later, our life looks quieter. Not simpler, but steadier. Mason is deep into his physical therapy program now. His days are long, filled with clinical rotations and case studies that leave him mentally drained and physically exhausted. But when he comes home, he rests. He doesn't apologize for it. He doesn't treat rest like a failure. That alone feels like a miracle. I took the new position at my father's company. The work is demanding, the responsibility heavier than anything I've carried before, but for the first time, I don't feel like I'm dragging someone behind me or pulling someone along. We're walking side by side. Our apartment still gets messy sometimes. Laundry still piles up when life gets overwhelming. But now, those things are just chores, not symbols of imbalance or resentment. And trust? Trust isn't something we assume anymore. It's something we practice. I learned that love doesn't mean paying for someone's future or managing their present. It means listening when your partner tells you who they are and believing them before fear fills in the gaps. Mason learned that needing support doesn't make him weak, and that worth isn't measured by exhaustion. If there's one lesson I'd leave with anyone watching this, especially those of us who come from comfort, it's this. Privilege isn't just about what you have, it's about what you don't have to fear. And if you don't examine that difference, it can quietly poison the people you love. We didn't almost lose each other because of wine glasses or emails. We almost lost each other because we didn't understand how differently we carried the same weight. Now we do. And that understanding, that's what finally made us equal.